But
Okay, now let's get back to
yeah,
what we're going to talk about. And remember, in the last episode that we did, we went and we zeroed in on the word Muhammad
yeah.
or Muhammadin, and you were very good. It's amazing because you were able to go back to the Hebrew and show us not only is this a reference, the reference that they're pointing to is actually not only is it plural, it also is it cannot be Muhammad because it's actually referring to, in our case, for those of us who are Christians, we see this as being Jesus Christ. But you say that there are some other references to Muhammad. You're gonna.
Well, actually, I went through 3 of the 4 already in the previous video. That was Mahmadim, Mahmad, as in the Hebrew point of Mahmadim, and Mahmad, the Hebrew word singular, plural and singular. Mahmadim referring to the bridegroom of Israel. That's a Jewish reference. Mahmad referring to the temple of Israel. That's a Jewish reference. And how these two, from the third point was the Christian point of view of both of these as being Jesus Christ. These are references to Jesus Christ from the Christian point of view. And there is the 4th thing which I want to talk about is another word, Muhammad, which exists. I'll just share a screen to be able to show you this. Share screen. So here we are. This page is up now. And this, as you can see, I've got it opened as JewishEncyclopedia.com, and we've got the word Mahamad there. Muhammad, can you see that? And it says more correctly Mahamad. It's pronounced Mahamad, but it's actually spelled Mahamad. I've got this picture here to just show you the difference between the spellings. Here we have, actually I've put down on references for the previous video. I didn't get around to showing. Those are the references on the side, reference John and Matthew and Mark and Matthew again and Revelations. Those are references to Jesus as the temple of God, and underneath those the references to Jesus as the groom of God. But here in the middle here I've got the word Muhammad in Arabic, and I've separated out with red lines, and I put a little arrow showing you read it this way, you read it from right to left, and I put underneath the letters MHMD so you can see them, and I've put underneath corresponding Hebrew letters MHMD, meaning treasure, delight, which is what we talked about in the previous video. And here is the word which we're talking about now, which is Muhammad, which is also pronounced Muhammad. But this is spelt without an H. It's spelled with an Ein. It's M-Ein-M-D. That would be like M-A-M-D, Muhammad. Very interesting, because this is the word that John of Damascus uses, as opposed to all the others before him who were using Muhammad. Very interesting indeed, because it's a suggestion which I have, is that that's because when John of Damascus was writing, by that time the Umayyads had suppressed Muhammad. They were not interested in Muhammad. If you look at even in the hadiths, all the later hadiths, the people who are on the Umayyad side, really, they say very nasty things about their prophet. You think, if you're going to say that about your prophet, you clearly hate him. I mean, there's no reason why you would say such horrendous things about a person unless you hated him. I think it's possible that some of those things actually came from the Umayyads because they really hated him and they wanted to get rid of this idea, and they had their own Muhammad, which was their office. Now, Mahamad, as I'll go back to the Hebrew page, there's the Jewish page, so here it is, Jewish Encyclopedia, and it's article 10,222-Mat-Hamad. And this was a group, this is a governing body which governs the synagogue or the Jewish community in a town. So the Mahamad was a governing body with several heads in the body. And this description available on the Jewish Encyclopedia is based on the Muhammad of the London synagogue, the London Sephardic synagogue, which had, I think, 5 heads instead of 7. But that sort of corresponds to, and that's the word which is used in John of Damascus in the Greek. If you look, he doesn't use an H. It's Muhammad. So,
can I jump in? When John of Damascus uses it, you get the strong impression he's talking about a person, not an office. So can you explain why he used this spelling if he was actually, seems to be talking about a person, not an office?
Well, it's I think if you're not part or not in the group, you might not understand who the leader was. You might think the leader was one person rather than one group, but it's a democratic sort of group, which is the leader. It is the leader of the community. So, but it's an office. So it's referring to the office of Muhammad. Now, as I said, there can be 7 heads, or there can be 5 heads. There could be less than that. There could be 3. Maybe there was a time when it came down to mean just 1. But I think this is what I think this is what it's about. This was a Jewish idea, and the Umayyads were they started off, if you think about the early coins of Muawiyah, while he was a client state of Byzantine Empire, they had crosses on them, and they had Muhammad written on them. They had references to Muhammad on these little coins with little crosses on them. But later, Muawiyah says some very nasty things about Jesus. It's like he changes his mind, and he says, he comments, I can't remember where the reference is, but there's a reference to the, if I find it, we'll put it up on a annotation. It's when he says that they are worshipping their dead God, Jesus. And it's quite a turnaround from having crosses on your coins and being a client state to Byzantium, and having crosses on your inscriptions, you know, the inscriptions on the Hamad baths, for example. He starts with the cross there. And then suddenly turning around later and saying, you know, this is you're worshipping a dead God, but our God is alive, for example, like this. So it's like there's a kind of a conversion of the Umayyads to Islam, or I would say a conversion away from Gnostic Muhammad, respect for the Gnostic Christian Muhammad, and instead they may have a Mahamad, which is the word which John of Damascus uses as opposed to Muhammad at that time. After all the references to Mehmet have sort of disappeared, then suddenly we have John of Damascus with Muhammad instead.
So which is the office?
Which is the office, which is the it's funny, the office is actually, the office was running early Islam, and that is actually Mahamad, sorry. We call it Muhammad as well. But
can I just make a point here?
Yes.
This could possibly allow for an amalgamation of an idea of Muhammad later when they're creating a biography, where they take bits and pieces, the historical Ilyas and various other people later, because if it's now viewed as an office, then it's possible to think of it as a collective rather than one individual.
Yeah, and it's very much sort of replaced, but they couldn't replace and get rid of completely all these references to the sort of Gnostic Christian Muhammad. So they had to find one person to sort of fit the bill. And I think they chose Ilyas as the earliest Arab king that they could for the Lahmids, because they were primarily from that side. This is the Abbasids decided this. I don't think the Umayyads did that. The Umayyads wouldn't have chosen Ilyas, because the Umayyads were essentially from a Ghassanid sort of Palmyrian sort of side of things. They were Western, and they would have chosen one of their own people to be the Muhammad if they had thought about it. But I think they actually rejected the concept of Muhammad as the Gnostic Christian Lord, the bridegroom, temple of God. They rejected this, and they went for a Muhammad as this Jewish Muhammad instead. And so, as you know, in Islam, there's a lot of things are taken from Judaism, not just the references in the Talmud, but also the practices, the way they live their lives. A lot of it is taken from Judaism. It's actually taken from Judaism. So there's a heavily amount of Judaization happening to these Gnostic Christians. And I think what happened with the Umayyads is that they became very Judaized. Now, while you can be friends with Jews as a Christian, you can be friends with Jews as a Christian. When you become a Judaizer, you really want to kind of replace Jews. You don't want to be their friends anymore. Some interesting points about the Gnostic materials which became the Quran. For example, we have this word alazina hadu, which is translated as Jews, literally means those who guide. We also have another word which was translated as Jews later, Yahud, which they translate. It's not really rational that this could mean Jew, because the word would be Yahudi, just like in Hebrew, Yahudi would be a Jew. So why did they choose Jude instead of Judean? Why did they choose Yahud instead of Yahudi to refer to Jew? And because it didn't refer to Jews, my idea is that this actually, from the Gnostic point of view, refers exactly to who Yahud is. Yahud is Judas. Jude, without the Greek suffix Judas. So to be a Yahud was to be a Judas, to be a traitor. But to be a Lazina Hadu, those who guide, this was the phrase used for Jews in the original Gnostic materials. But as the Muslims become more and more powerful, or the Arabs becoming more and more powerful and under the Umayyads, they want to replace those who guide. They don't want to have Jewish guides anymore. So they become their own Muhammad. They become their own guides. It's a kind of displacement theology.
So they're stepping out of the shadows of the Jews, essentially.
Yeah.
And standing on their own feet.
That's right. And as they step out of the shadows of you see, Gnostic Christians very interested in Jewish Kabbalah. They're very interested in Jewish scriptures and Jewish traditions. They don't want to be Jews. They know that, for example, in Paul, it says that the Jews are the ones who have been entrusted with the oracles of God. So they want to find out what are the secrets that the Jews know. That they can understand more deep sort of spiritual Gnostic ideas about Jesus Christ and see what was he saying from a Gnostic point of view. But that's why they're called Alazina Hadu, those who guide. For example, it says, "Oh, you who believe, whether you are Jews or whether you're Christians or whether you are Sabians, whoever believes in Allah on the last day, they will have no fear upon them, neither shall they grieve." The phrase it uses in that verse is Alazina Hadu, those who guide, and that is translated as Jews. But when it says nasty things about Jews in the Quran, it uses the word Yahud, Judas. So that's quite an interesting difference, because they were not referring to the same thing. But under the Umayyads, they can't stop the fact that everybody knows Alazina Hadu means Jews. So they just add to that and say, but the Jews are the Judases as well, Yahud. And that's why we don't like them. So they sort of replace the Jews. So there's displacement theology. They've replaced the Jews with their themselves instead. So they've become Judaized, as opposed to being interested in Jewish tradition. They now regard themselves as the new Jews. And that's actually a phrase which, by the way, Timothy of Baghdad uses to refer to them. He calls them the new Jews. He calls them new Jews. That's what the Muslims are. So I believe as new Jews and replacing the Jews, they would have had their own Mahamad. And that's what John of Damascus is referring to. And it's this word here, you see here, which is also Mahamad. So it's not got a scriptural basis at all. There's nothing in scripture. I have actually opened up a scriptural reference to it, if I can get there. Here, I think it is. There it is.
Might it suggest that there was a community of leaders who were behind the creation of the Quran initially?
Oh, I think that's probably the Abdul Malik's council on who were creating and revising the Quran were definitely the Mahamad. I believe that.
Interesting.
And I think this is why John of Damascus refers to it as a kind of a foreshadow, as the antichrist, a sort of foreshadow of the antichrist, because it's one governing body with 7 heads, and that would have been viewed, I think, from the Book of Revelations talks about the beast rising from the sea, which from the point of view from if you're in Baghdad, the sea is either south or it's going to be to the far west with the Arabs in the west. So I think that, and John of Damascus was in Damascus, not Baghdad. I mean, he's taught the sea for him is only going to be the Mediterranean. So that's going to be the Muslims of the Holy Land have got their own Mahamad. So this kind of Mahamad has risen out of the sea. So he's, oh, there's the beast with the 7 heads. So he's sort of seeing this as a foreshadow of the Antichrist. So this is and by the way, of course, these new Jews are not actually Jews. You know, they say they're more like the kind of, again, from the Book of Revelations, this synagogue of Satan. Those who say they are Jews but are not, they're a synagogue of Satan. You know that from the. So John of Damascus is I think seeing the Mahamad of the Umayyads and saying, there you go, that's the beast. This is what we were told about beforehand, and that's what. But he's saying that they are misleading Christians. He doesn't say that he doesn't talk about Islam as a new religion. He's just talking about this Mahamad is misleading Christians, and I think he regards the Gnostic Christians as being basically ignorant Christians, and that they're being led astray by this Mahamad, which is this governing body of the Umayyads, which from his point of view has risen out of the Mediterranean Sea. So that's why he's making those references, I think. It's a
So
theological
just so everybody is aware of what we're talking about, John of Damascus, he would have been in the courts there. He would have been working amongst the Muslims in the 8th century. He dies in 749. So he is there as the Umayyads are decreasing and the Abbasids are increasing. So he's watching all this happen. He would have been around.
Yeah.
So this is material that he would be privy to. Again, this is, we need to show this on a timeline. We don't have one in front of us, but it'd be good just so we make sure that people.
WikiNoah.org. We have a good timeline on WikiNoah.org in the Islam's Origins page. So have a look on that, and you'll see.
You're really pushing WikiNoah, aren't you? Good man.
Yeah, go WikiNoah. So join in, everybody. Come on, let's join in. We might be able to get this finished by Christmas. So there you go. So
okay, so you've got this. The thing with. Okay, we've now looking at what John of Damascus said. Yeah. Go ahead and let's try to bring this down to show that how this can be applied.
I've got a couple of references to Mahamad. It's actually, this word doesn't, not like Muhammad, which actually occurs in the Hebrew Bible. The word Mahamad on its own doesn't. We have Mamadam, Muhammad, which means and Muhammad. That's probably the best with two occurrences here. And then we've got Umimmamadeka. So it's not, but these references don't have any kind of significance of his servants, the attendants of his waiters, of his servants, the attendants of his ministers. It's got no reference to temples, no reference to the Lord, no reference to anything. It's very minimal. It's just a governing body. They translated here as attendants. So it doesn't have any reference to Scripture, and that's kind of also in keeping with the Umayyads idea. They've sort of divorced, after Abdul Malik, they've divorced the Quranic materials from the previous scriptures. They don't care what the previous scriptures say. They have not any interest in it at all whatsoever. They simply are interested in trying to keep the Arabs together and organize them politically, and they have their Muhammad do this, and they don't care that that's not got any kind of reference for anything. Because they regard themselves, and that's chapter 7 we looked at earlier when it says the light unto the nations, they regard themselves as the light unto the nations. They've replaced Israel as the light unto the nations, and they are now the light unto the nations. They are now the Nabi for the Ummi, the Gentile prophet as it's translated later. By the way, Ummi, Ummat ha'olam, these are the nations of the world. So Israel is the light unto the Ummat ha'olam, the light unto the nations. This is the same word Ummi, which they say means Gentile or unlettered. So it's actually the prophet to the Gentiles has turned into the unlettered prophet later. I believe the Abbasids did that. The Abbasids created this. But the idea of a prophet to the Gentiles was the Umayyads regarding of their own sort of central core government and to unite all of the ignorant Christians, as John of Damascus regards them, and pagan Arabs, and try and create a new thing, and to stop the wars, incessant wars, which have been, or civil wars, which have been breaking out between them. And I think in this, the pacifist, mainly pacifist Gnostic Christians, because the Gnostic Christians like Manichaeans and Mandaeans, they were super pacifists. They lost out badly, and they got stamped out of existence, really. Although they still do have this kind of Gnostic traditions in parts of Azerbaijan and the north again, amongst groups called the Alevis, and they would be like the Shiites, sort of Sufi Shiites. They're not Sufis, they're Shiites and they're Sufis at the same time. So the spiritual Shiites kind of continue this sort of tradition, where they have this trinity in spiritual Shiism. But anyway, this that's beside the point for this. This point is about how the word Mahamad can also mean a specific governing Jewish body, which I think is what John of Damascus was referring to when he talks about a pre-taste of the antichrist.
Okay, this is exciting. Now, you mentioned that I don't know if you want to encapsulate this, conclude this, bring us to some type of concluding remarks. Can you do that now so that we can then unpack, really finish with this one? We went off on a few little tangents there, but try to get back to this one last idea of the office of Muhammad.
Okay, so this little video, I suppose, was trying to focus on a different interpretation of the word behind the word Muhammad. We talked about in the previous video the word Muhammad as a Gnostic Christian concept referring to Jesus Christ or the Lord. But here's another view of Muhammad being a Jewish, a governing body for a Jewish community, or as I'm suggesting, a Judaized community, a community who believe that they're as good as Jewish, and they don't need the Jews anymore. But they are organized along similar lines that Jews are organized on, and so they have the Mahamad, which I think, and that point of my point of this one was and my suggestion is that this is what John of Damascus is talking about when he says Muhammad. Although it's translated from John of Damascus documents as Muhammad, they put an aspiration of the A. There is no H in what John of Damascus is talking about. He hasn't used, and it's not just an H. It's not an aspirated H. It should have been a Kha. It should have been the Chai, the same as Christos. So, but they haven't used that word. They just translated the word which John of Damascus uses exactly as Muhammad. And I think that's not an accident. I think that's exactly because what he's talking about is a Muhammad, which had 7 heads and was a governing body. And that's why he thought it was a pre-taste of the antichrist. So this is another interpretation. This is not a Gnostic Christian interpretation. This is an interpretation from a Jewish point of view of how a group of Gentiles thought they were as good as better than Jews, could replace the Jews, but organize themselves along the same lines as the Jews. They were not really Jews, but they were presenting themselves as the new Jews, if you like, the new Israel, the new owners of the Holy Land.
Okay.
And they had an organization which was in imitation of the Jewish Mahamad. And that was sort of like the anti-Mahamad, if you like. So it was not the Jewish Mahamad. It was a fake Jewish Mahamad. Mm-hmm. So that's another interpretation. And that would be from the Umayyad side later, not the proto-Muslim Islam. This is much closer to how Islam began. And then the Abbasids then later, another 50 years,
now,
60 years later.
Unshare your screen now, and then let's
yeah.
so the 3 of us can talk.
Yeah. There.
Okay. Go ahead, Mel. Why don't you jump in here, and then let's bring this to a conclusion, this one to a conclusion.
Yeah, so the thought that occurred to me is when the Abbasids started using hadiths to establish Islamic laws, they seem to be following the Jewish method of establishing laws which were based on case studies and applying them to stories from Muhammad's time. So I kind of see how this council could sort of be seen into the Abbasid period. I don't know, Joe, if that tallies with your understanding of it.
Yeah, my idea, I believe that the Umayyads had already established this, that this was up and running in the time of the Umayyads. I think that the Abbasids, because you know that the traditional story says that the Abbasids began as a kind of what's called Mawali, this kind of opposing group to the Umayyads. But when they took power, they converted. They actually became Sunni. They adopted the Sunni religion. So I think that they adopted it again. It's politics. They just want to unite their empire. And they tried to amalgamate and create. So Islam as we know it was created by the Abbasids. But the forerunner to Islam as we know it was there with the Umayyads. But the earliest proto-Islamic sort of Gnostic Christian version, that's really gone. That didn't make it into the final cut. The Abbasids took ideas from that, mixed it with the Umayyads' ideas, and created this new thing. The only people who almost preserve that are like the Alevis. You know, they still have they have a kind of a Eucharist, and they believe in a Trinity still. So they're a very secretive group, and they're extremely badly persecuted right now, this very moment in Turkey, for example.
Okay, so this is fascinating. So what we're doing and what you're doing is much of what we have been doing, and that is looking and seeing what's on the ground, seeing what were the discussions that were happening at that time. Here you have John of Damascus. He's there in the Muslim courts. He's working amongst them. So he sees what's going on. He sees as this discussion is happening. He's there during the Umayyad dynasty, but he lives right up until when the Abbasids take over. And it looks like what you're saying, Joe, is that Islam as we know today is an Abbasid creation, redacted back.
Yeah.
and redacted back to the 7th century, which doesn't have any antecedents over there. But you're saying that this whole premise of Muhammad, or this present of this name Muhammad, could have been something that was pulled out of that and then was redefined as an office. And in this case, it was an office of group people. And I think that this is fascinating, because you're going and you're looking and you're putting what's in what we see written, and you're putting it into a historical context. You're putting it into a timeline. You're seeing how the sequence goes, and you're seeing how the political exigencies that were happening at that time also had an awful lot of impact as to how the theology would then bear out. And the Abbasids didn't want to destroy everything that had gone behind. What they had done, and actually what you're telling me, is that they actually adopted it, and they took it on
amalgamated it.
Amalgamated it. Okay, that's probably a better word.
They took the Gnostic Christian Muhammad and they mixed it with the Umayyad Mahamad. I mean, this is looking at the non-Muslim sources. They took what John of Damascus is referring to, and they took what, for example, Sebios is referring to. Maybe Sebios was referring to a Mahamad, maybe, or maybe he was referring to. I think Sebios was referring to a Mahamad, but I think that Thomas the Presbyter is referring to Arabs of Christ. Tayyid the Mahmed, I think, means basically Arabs of Christ, Arabs of the Gnostic Christ, and they've amalgamated the Gnostic Christ with this. They've taken Mahamad and they've taken Muhammad, and they've mixed the two, and they've created Muhammad as we know him.
Just so people know, the historical Ilyas.
Based on the historical. Now remember, the historical Ilyas is from the 7th century. So is Thomas the Presbyter. So is the Chronicles of Sebios. These are all from the 7th century. John of Damascus would be from the 8th century. So by the time the 8th century Abbasids, they eradicate and destroy the Umayyads, that then starts to take shape, and that's now why you understand why almost all the theology starts to be introduced in the 9th and 10th century. So follow the timeline. You can see how this all fits.
Just before the Abbasids take control, John of Damascus he's before they do that. He's at the last sort of vestiges of the Umayyad side. So the Abbasids are kind of after John of Damascus. Something new is happening. So this is before
John of Damascus dies in 749. The Abbasids take over in 749.
Right.
Can I just jump in and just make a point? The Tafsirs seem to be ignorant of these meanings of Muhammad.
They haven't got a clue. They're not. They're just in. I think the Abbasids really didn't care. I think the Abbasids were mainly the remnant of Sassanids who had been forcibly converted. They didn't really care. They just did what they had to unite their empire and basically reestablish some kind of Persian empire.
So it's actually quite cynical then, really.
Cynical, absolutely. I think the Abbasid creation of Islam is completely cynical, and was just basically trying to appease everybody on the lowest common denominator. There are some things they couldn't escape. They had to deal with that by making some fantasy story, because too many people knew that. But they basically worked with what they had a choice: massacre everybody. By the way, you know that's actually what they did. They killed everybody who could read in Central Asia. Did you know that? They killed everybody who could read. So, but they had that option to kill everybody who could read across the entire empire, which they couldn't do. They tried it in Central Asia. Or they could try to basically change the narrative,
Propagandize.
Yeah.
Well, this is where the whole setup of a new Mecca then fits nicely in with all of this.
Well,
now, before we go, Joe, this has been, thank you so much. You're bringing in a whole nother tangent, a whole nother criteria, a whole nother set of studies. 20 years you've been working on this. It's excellent to see where you're going with it. Mel, before we go, I want you to say something now. How do you fit this all together now, concerning the political structures that were going on up in Hira and in Kufa, and that was also happening in those centers? Remember, we're talking about, if you're talking about Kufa and Hira, you're talking about Sassanid, you're talking about Persian area. If you could just say one or two ideas that you have picked up on what Joe is saying concerning your paradigm, and concerning what you've in Marad have come up with, that all of this happens in the 8th and the 9th century, much further north. Can you then understand how then Joe's is actually amalgamating and is helping you out, coming from a whole different position?
Yeah, so my sense of it is that there was a historical figure called Ilyas. He was a major instigator in terms of the expansion of the Arabs into Persia and into the Byzantine areas. And then later in places like Hira and Kufa, we have the beginnings of the Quran being created, and it was in the context of the various academies. And so we can see how the Mandaics, the Gnostic Christians all got involved in this big hodgepodge and mixture. There's a lot, obviously, that Joe has shared tonight, which is new for me. So it's just going to take a bit of absorbing and trying to understand it. For me, it's a new perspective. The idea of Thomas the Presbyter may not be talking about a prophet called Mahamad. You know, when he talks about the Tayyaye of Muhammad, the idea that he might actually be referring to the Tayyaye of the Gnostic Christians. Well, this is a new one for me. So I may have to go back to the drawing board and rethink my ideas. Maybe it's possible that he's actually talking about an individual and the Gnostic Christians. Perhaps there's a double meaning there. It's hard to say, but it's a very interesting new development. So thank you, Joe.
That's no problem. I mean, of course, they could have easily regarded their leader as a new Messiah. And when he failed to build the temple, rebuild the temple, that could be why they decided, why the Umayyads decided to do what they could to build the temple there, because they were planning to say that it had happened, it succeeded, because of course the Messiah has to rebuild the new temple. From the Christian point of view, Jesus Christ's body is the temple and was rebuilt on the resurrection. But from the Judaized point of view, when you've rejected the divinity of Jesus, you still need a temple. So,
okay, listen, Joe, thank you so much. Mel, thank you so much for bringing Joe on board. Those of you who have been listening, let's hear exactly your response to it. You do have responses, I'm sure, but this will cause a discussion and a debate. Right at the bottom, make sure you get it out there. Joe and Mel, can you make sure you keep on top of it and try to respond as you see it? And what we'll do, Joe, what we've done in the past, and what I've done with Mel and with others, as people write and as we see good questions that are coming up, we might want to do a Q&A period where we'll bring you back again. It'll probably be in about another 2 or 3 weeks, because I know you're going to be going on vacation with your family. But when you have free time, what we'll do is we'll come and bring you back, and we'll throw these questions at you, and then we'll see how you respond to it. Because this is how we give and take, and this is how these are what I always call these white papers. We're putting them out there as white papers. Yeah. What if scenarios? And these are things that you've been working on for 20 years. Now let's get other people to listen to you. Let's get other people to hear what you're saying. Let's get other people to respond to you. Let's get other people to discuss with you and even confront you. And that's just going to help you, because it's like iron sharpening iron. And I want to thank you for coming on board. I know you're not permitted to show your face. I know it is.
Thank you.
You have had problems in the past, because people do have found out who you are, and that's why we want to make sure that we do keep your security is important. Mel and I, nonetheless, we will continue to make this as a platform for people to bring these new ideas forward, because we really do want to know, we really do want to unpack how Islam did emerge, how it began, where did it come from? And what we're finding, as you're going to see, it's not the Islam of the traditions. This is not the Islam of the Abbasids. This is not the Islam of the 9th and 10th century, redacted back onto the 7th century. We're seeing now that we're getting an entirely different scenario. It's an exciting scenario, because this is really how it did happen from what the evidence does show. Joe, you've been a great blessing. Thanks for coming on board. Mel, thanks for you again.
Thank you.
And we'll probably see the two of you back in about 2 or 3 weeks. We'll come back and we'll answer your questions. And from there, we'll talk off, and probably we'll have to rejig, as Mel is saying. He's now going to have to rethink some of his paradigm. Well, this is part of the process. We want to be able to be open to do just that. We go where the evidence leads. God bless you. It's been great being with you. This is here, Jay, Mel, and in this case, Joe. So Joe, Jay, and Mel. Over and out.
Bye-bye.
Bye.